the Western India at the time was under the rule of the Peshwas, and that was the time the British were keen to introduce the colonial reforms. As a part of the colonial reforms, they introduced the idea of modern bureaucracy, and they also introduced the idea of modern education and modern employment. So we're talking about the modern means of ideological state apparatus, where education has become one of the important tools of governance. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, like his, let's say, political and social predecessor, Jyotiba Phule, was a product of colonial modernity. That's where it was the English education, it was the British employment opportunities, which were first time open to the marginal sections of the society. So where, friends, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's father was a subedar of the British Indian Army. So that's how the roots of modernity reached the domestic space of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So, but unfortunately, despite of his father working for the British Indian Army, but his identity was always seen from his ascribed perspective, not from his achieved perspective. So I think this is where we need to understand that that his identity remained considered as an untouchable identity. That's where Ambedkar was subjected to sorry, Ambedkar was subjected to multiple forms of discrimination within the school and within the society. So, friends, as all of us know that was the age where the caste system was in the peak stage, especially in the Western India, where Dalits were not allowed even to walk in the freely after evening. So, given that kind of circumstances, the diverse types of social atrocities were primarily extended to even the modern spaces like spaces like a school. So that's where when Ambedkar entered school on the 7th November 1900, at the age of 9 years, he was subjected to multiple forms of discrimination within the classroom and within the school. So Ambedkar recalls his experiences with his schooling, where he was not allowed to sit on par with other friends. Rather, he was pushed to the corner of the classroom, and he was also not allowed to drink water on par with others. So this was the historical context in which Dr. B.R. Ambedkar exposed to the letters of knowledge. But friends, despite of the hurdles he had faced because of the caste system, he never gave up the struggle for knowledge. His goal was only two-folded in nature. One is struggle for knowledge and struggle for social freedom. So these were the two important aims which unfolded the freedom struggle of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So we are talking about the freedom struggle. We were only familiar to one type of freedom struggle, that is the Indian National Congress freedom struggle. But most of us are not that much familiar with the freedom struggle of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. His freedom struggle was primarily meant for freedom for knowledge, freedom from the social clutches, freedom for emancipation. These were some of the goals which were primarily, let's say, shaping the mind of Dr. Ambedkar when he was a small child. So that's where, friends, after completion of, he was one of the first Dalit from Bombay Presidency to complete the matriculation by 1910 and he was one of the first Dalit in the modern South Asia to go to the abroad. Those times, he went to Columbia University back to 1913, which was primarily considered as one of the greatest historical departure from the perspective of the educational emancipation of not only Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, for the entire Dalits or marginal sections of the modern South Asia. So friends, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, he writes in his famous book on waiting for visa, where he says that my 6 years of experience in West, both in America and London, is so fruitful. I was primarily treated as a human being. I was primarily treated with respect and dignity. But at the moment I go to India, my identity always reduced to the untouchable, let's say, identity. I was always haunted because of my identity. So I was not a free bird in my own country, but I could enjoy the highest form of freedom as a human being in this foreign land. That's what Dr. B.R. Ambedkar writes in his famous, let's say, work on waiting for visa. So now the point is that here, when we're talking about Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, his entire struggle for knowledge, his struggle for freedom, both the constitutional freedom, political freedom, social freedom, all these different types of freedoms primarily emerges from his own experiences as the untouchable, who was primarily considered as the slave of the social system. So that's where, friends, one can understand, one can see some commonality between the slavery based on the race and the slavery based on the caste identity. So Dr. B.R. Ambedkar writings primarily emerges from his own understanding or his own experience. That's where we need to understand even the writings of Gopal Guru, who talks about experience as epistemology. That kind of framework primarily emerged from the writings of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, and especially his 21 volumes, which primarily touches upon the diverse themes and perspectives on the Indian society, starting from the idea of who are the Shudras, the origin of untouchability, to the partition of Pakistan, and also the issue on the issue of minorities, on the issue of nation building, and the issue of the constitution. So, friends, Ambedkar primarily, Ambedkar is a project in himself. So I would like to say that Ambedkar is a epistemological project in himself. So we need to use the multiple social science perspectives, both the economic perspective, political perspective, sociological perspective, anthropological perspective, even the feminist perspective, to understand or to reconstruct, the thought process of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So that's where, friends, I wish to argue that his entire struggle for knowledge was primarily, let's say, led him to go to the top intellectual centers of the world, such as the London School of Economics in Britain, and also the Columbia University in the United States of America. So that's where he got a chance to meet some of the best minds of the world, especially one of the greatest philosophers of the world at that time, by name John Dewey, who is considered as the pragmatic philosopher, who was known for combining, who is known for giving equal importance to the issues of issues of economic empowerment, along with the ideological empowerment. That's where Ambedkar writes as a part of tribute, as a part of acknowledgement in his PhD thesis. In his PhD thesis, he talks about the great impact of John Dewey on his thought process. So when Ambedkar came to India after studying in Great Britain and as well as United States of America, he never stopped himself only to the project of writing as well as the project of the political awakening. He gave the famous slogan titled "Educate, Agitate, and Organize." These were the three ratnas given by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar: educate, organize, educate, agitate, and organize. So here he gave the highest importance to the idea of education. Why Ambedkar gave importance to education is one of the important questions. Because by early part of the 20th century itself, he realized that there is no alternative to the education. Because most of the marginal sections of the society, they were pushed to the backbone, or they were primarily marginalized because by denying access to knowledge. So, and also because most of the marginal sections, they were also deprived of the economic resources. They were deprived of the physical resources, natural resources, such as access to water, the access to common places, so the access to spiritual spaces. So that means for an untouchable, the issues of the natural the untouchables were primarily deprived of the natural resources as well as the spiritual resources and the means of knowledge. That's where, friends, Ambedkar started the multi-strategic project. He's as a part of this let's say, strategic project, he has chosen education as a mission. That's where, friends, we need to understand the historic contributions of Ambedkar in making of educational institutions in the early part of the 20th century. So by taking inspiration from Jyotiba Phule, he has started number of schools and colleges in different parts of, especially the in different parts of the present day Maharashtra. I think that's where we need to recall the contributions of the Nawab of Nizam Nawab of Hyderabad state. He was also very kind enough to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, and he has donated lands as a part of his educational mission. So the point I am trying to drive here is that the Aurangabad and other places which were part of the present day Maharashtra, and which were part of the then Nizam state, right? Where there are, one can see number of educational institutions started by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So that's where, friends, we need to understand the educational mission of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar from back to early part of 20th century. So Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, he was also, let's say, stopped. Let's say he was not only happy with, let's say, the educational mission in the form of schools and colleges, he was also thinking at large for educating the nation. So educating the nation has become his mission. So that's one of the reasons why, by taking inspiration from people like Pule as well as Gopalakrishna Gokhale, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was always pushing for Right to Education Act as a part of the making of Indian constitutions. So if you look at very carefully, if you refer to the constitutional debates of the independent India, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was always demanding for declaring education as a fundamental right. Why Ambedkar was very keen to declare education as a fundamental right is also important question. Because by 1950s, most of our children in India, in rural India, not only rural India, in different parts of, including in urban India, especially from the marginal sections of the society, they were not aware of education. So though they were aware of education, but because of the poverty, they were not in a position to go to the schools. So that's where he realized that child labor was one of the major problems which were primarily responsible for preventing the enrollment of children from the socially and economically marginal sections of the society. So therefore, what is the alternative? The alternative is to educate all the children of the new nation. So the children of the new nation, in order to participate in the making of the modern India, they will be educated. So then only they are going to be active citizens, right? Otherwise, the uneducated citizens, though they may use their voting rights as important tools of democracy, but they were not in a position to make use of the modern democracy in a scientific manner. So that's where, friends, when Ambedkar was demanding for education as a fundamental right, but unfortunately, the feudal leaders of the then Congress party were not not inclined towards accepting education as a fundamental right. So that's one of the reasons why the education was primarily pushed to the directive principles of state policy. So, friends, that's where the people of India, they had to wait almost for 60 years from 1950s to 2010 to declare education as a fundamental right. So, but now, despite of all this, let's say, delay in declaring education as a fundamental right, if you look at it very carefully, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has ensured the yes, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has ensured the safeguards for the marginal sections of the society, especially for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, by introducing some of the constitutional provisions. As all of us know that these constitutional provisions are none other than the reservation policy program, which were primarily implemented in three sectors. One is in education, second one is employment, and third one is political institutions, especially in the case of the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. So that's where, friends, if you look at what is the impact of affirmative action on India, especially from the perspective of the subalterns of the Indian society. As one of the famous Indian sociologists by name Surendra Singh Jodka and Sukhdev Thorat and also Thomas Winkoff, all of them, they primarily argued in their writings published in EPW that the impact of affirmative action policy has created a new class of Indians from the marginal sections of the society. At least half million people or half million youth from the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe could reach the university spaces, otherwise which were impossible for these kinds of sections of the society. So that means, friends, one Ambedkar has created millions of minds, especially from the marginal sections of the society. So that's where, because of the constitutional safeguards, constitutional provisions, which he envisaged in the form of reservations in education and employment, initially for the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, later extended to the backward classes, later extended to the Muslim minorities in different states of India. That's one of the reasons why now the first time in the history of modern India of the 70 years of independence has produced at least the millions of youth from these sections of the society who were in a position to go to the colleges, go to the universities, and they could obtain their PhDs and become the faculty members in universities and colleges, otherwise which was unthinkable some 70 years ago. So therefore, friends, I wish to submit a point that education worked as a social, as a strategy of social transformation, right? And it's not only created a kind of a social mobility in the form of a economic empowerment. These educated classes from diverse sections of the society, such as from the perspective of caste, from the perspective of tribe, from the perspective of religion, it also created a critical intellectual mass or critical intellectual class. So this critical intellectual class, in the form of, let's say, in the form of Sukhdev Thorat, in the form of scholars like Surendra Singh Jodka, or in the form of scholars like Jawuddin, we were in a position to respond to the issues which are confronting the nation, which are confronting the marginal sections of the society. So therefore, friends, we're talking about the idea of affirmative action. In the case of the marginal sections of the society, it primarily worked as a two-edged knife. It primarily transformed the economic. It primarily led to the economic transformation on the one hand, at least to a certain extent, and also it has created an intellectual base. It is because of this intellectual base, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has become a part of the sociological imagination of all the educational institutions. So if you look at it very carefully, some 30 years ago, Ambedkar was not part of any school or any universities. There was no image of Ambedkar. We hardly see the image of Ambedkar even in the police station photographs or in the government offices. Only after 1991, as a part of celebration of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar 100 years of Jayanti, which has created a new demand or a new type of imagination all over India. So this is where we need to recollect the contributions of people like people from Maharashtra, people from North India, especially Uttar Pradesh, who created or who demanded a new space for Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So then followed it. The latter it percolated to Bihar, West Bengal, to Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. One can see the image of Ambedkar as part of the sociological imagination. So Ambedkar has reached now all the educational institutions. Ambedkar image has reached all the villages. That's where Surendra Singh Jodka, in one of his famous article on the image of village, a comparison of Ambedkar, Gandhi, and Nehru, where he talks about Ambedkar. So the point is that, friends, Ambedkar has a symbol of modernity. Ambedkar has become a symbol of inspiration. Ambedkar has become a symbol of empowerment, at least an ideological empowerment, and a symbolic empowerment to the marginal sections of the society. So therefore, now we need to understand what are the important contributions of Ambedkar towards the empowerment of the Indian society. I think, friends, this is where we need to understand Ambedkar in a larger perspective. Ambedkar as a nation builder. So most of the time, when we're talking about Ambedkar, people tend to reduce Ambedkar to only Dalits, or to certain extent some tribes, or to some certain extent some backward classes, friends, or to certain extent marginal minorities. But this is not true. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar is the champion of the modern Indian constitution. So Dr. B.R. Ambedkar is a national builder. Why and how he has become a national builder? So let us look at his important contributions from the perspective of the constitutional conceptualization. So we're talking about the conceptualization of the constitution. He was a person who was articulating for the right to property, the right to property on the basis of gender. So in a sense, you are the first feminist of modern India. Unfortunately, until recently, most of the feminists were not in a position to recognize the contributions of Ambedkar, especially from India. Only some of the greatest sociologists and historians from America, like Gail Ahmed, like Hilary Gillette, and these are the people from America. They had recognized the contributions of Ambedkar in the making of modern India, and also in the context of the women's empowerment. So, as all of us know that Ambedkar, as a part of protest, he resigned as a law minister when his proposals was rejected on the question of right to property on the basis of gender. So the point is that, friends, he was articulating the new vision of India on the basis of gender justice. He was articulating the new vision of India by talking about the political equality, by talking about the cultural equality, by talking about the linguistic equality, by talking about the social equality. So, friends, why this kind of equalities are important? So, what kind of lessons one can learn from the history of India? So, though the idea of equality, the idea of justice, the idea of liberty are not new to the Indian subcontinent. Go back to ancient India itself. People like philosophers like Buddha has primarily articulated the new vision of India long back, for 1,000 years ago. Yeah, that's what we have read as a part of the history of Nalanda University. But what has happened to the great historical past? That's what even Amartya Sen, in his famous book, The Argumentative Indian, he talks about the idea of the argumentative tradition, which is very much part of the Indian culture and civilization, either in the ancient India, either in the medieval India, or in the modern India. But why? But somehow, as all of us know, that this is where even we can recollect the writings of one of the famous historian and public scholar like Romello Thapar, who talks about the idea of the heterodox tradition, which is an antithesis of orthodox tradition. So unfortunately, though there was always a constant attempt to liberalize the Indian traditions towards the idea of equality, the idea of justice, but ultimately it is that traditional thought which dominated the Indian thinking process. That's where the caste system and other systems of oppression has continued for thousands of years. So that's where Ambedkar as a victim of untouchability, which goes beyond the identity. Because of your identity, you are primarily deprived of even access to water. So access to water also a major struggle for most of the Dalits, not only during the time of Ambedkar, way back to 1930s. Even when I was a child, I have seen in 1980s to 1990s, I used to see the struggles of Dalits in different parts of the rural Andhra Pradesh. So given this kind of experience, friends, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's contributions was primarily towards he was primarily conceptualizing the new India, which primarily gives the equal identity, irrespective of the caste, irrespective of gender, irrespective of religion and region and race. So that's where, friends, well, Ambedkar was talking about the legal, talking about the rights discourse. Rights discourse is one of the important tools for for understanding or for transforming the society. That's where even I wish to bring here the one of the famous famous scholar by name Arjun Sen Gupta. Way back to 2005, he had written a book called Right to Development, where he talks about right to education, right to healthcare, and right to employment, and right to dignity as some of the important means of the development. So, friends, here, so that's where the Constitution on the one hand it talks about the rights discourse, and the Constitution on the other hand also talks about the safeguards for the marginal sections of the society. So in that way, because of the at least the legal safeguards, the people from the marginal sections, especially the scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, who are the major victims of the society, they were in a position to they always had a kind of hope on the nation. They were always had some kind of hope on the role of a state. So, but as all of us know that, friends, despite of the constitutional provisions, even today, the diverse practices of untouchability has been continued. So this is where I wish to highlight once again the writings of Sukhdev Thorat and Ghanshyam Shah in their famous book, Untouchability in Rural India, where they talk about the mapping the untouchability in different parts of India. Right, from Andhra Pradesh to Uttar Pradesh, they talk about what are the different forms of untouchability even today is practiced. So, despite of the constitutional safeguards. So, I wish to argue that the Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's vision for India was primarily comes from a holistic vision. So he was a staunch believer of religious tolerance. So that's one of the reasons why India has become something different despite of all the limitation. Why India has something different when compared to our let's say neighboring countries such as Sri Lanka or Bangladesh or Bhutan or Nepal or Pakistan. All our neighboring countries are going in one direction. It is thanks to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and his vision of inclusion and his vision for inclusive India, which primarily reflected in the form of the cultural pluralism, religious tolerance, which was primarily ensured in a number of, let's say, articles, a number of safeguards, which that's where, friends, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar need to be understood as a builder of a modern nation, as a builder of modern nation. He belonged to the each and every citizen of India. As my friend Dr. Jawuddin, as a part of introductory remark, he said, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Jayanti is not limited to only one segment of society, friends. That is completely wrong. Because by reducing his identity, his role to one particular segment, we are, let's say, reducing ourselves as a citizens, right? So that's where, friends, though Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has envisaged the free India and the India which is beyond which goes beyond the discrimination, but as one of the famous documentary which talks about the untouched India highlights the diverse forms of discrimination and diverse forms of untouchability. So I wish to let's say start by saying that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, especially his idea of political inclusion, though yes, though it gave some kind of political space for the marginal sections of the society, especially the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in the Indian Parliament. But unfortunately, at the empirical level, the society has not transformed as envisaged by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So that's where we need to recollect the famous quotation of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, where he says that the social democracy is the precondition for political democracy. Social democracy is the precondition for political democracy. Because as long as the society which works on the principles of hierarchy, works on the principles of institutionalization of discrimination, the democracy, the political democracy doesn't make much sense. Though it may give some physical space, but at the empirical level or at the ideological level, it doesn't convey any proper understanding or holistic vision. So, friends, as a scholars, as a students of social science, as a responsible citizens of our modern India, what I would like to suggest is that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has written more than almost 21 volumes during his lifetime. But as a scholar in 21st century, what is our moral responsibility towards the making of knowledge? So we were the people who are blessed with all the computers, laptop, or smartphone, and we are in a position to access the information, including the digital libraries. The one and only appeal to all the young scholars, and my request to all my, let's say, people of my age and also my seniors, is that let us take the project of Ambedkar epistemology very seriously. By taking Ambedkar as an inspiration, we need to publish number of books and articles on the one hand, so that these books and articles are going to highlight what is the status of the multiple marginalities in the Indian society, and by studying the multiple marginalities, we are also going to work towards the empowerment of these sections through the legal interventions and the political interventions. So, therefore, friends, I would like to submit by saying that education is the one and only tool for social transformation. So, let us learn from Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's, let's say, life, and let us build a India which is envisaged by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So once again, I would like to thank my friend Dr. Jiauddin for giving me this opportunity. And also, I wish all my friends who are participating in this webinar, Ambedkar Jayanti and Jai Bhim. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you so much. It was a perfect elaboration on the idea of Baba Sahib Ambedkar's on his Jayanti. And nothing could end up with the saying that no political democracy could be achieved without having social democracy. And perhaps all the research which you spoke of and emphasis that epistemological study of Ambedkar's knowledge is the premise that we all should continue to work on, rethink, re-understand whatever reason we have. Without reading and rethinking, the ideas which is there cannot be translated to another generation. So in that note, and what best friends I like Professor Nagaraju's talk that, you know, Baba Sahib Ambedkar was the first person who could talk of gender rights, women rights from the caste perspective. And caste perspective, within the caste structure, no one tried to spoke and write and propagate. He was the person who could bring in through constitutional framework and giving rights to everybody on the basis of gender. And perhaps that is the reason that the restrictions, the prohibition, the problems of caste structure is so deeply rooted that we have, as the guest of the day said, that we could not have writers or sociologists from the country. We had Jelinor Inuit and Gellum Wade and others who wrote on caste and gender in India, but not somebody here in the early part. So any debate, any issues which is based on, which talks of equality, rights, empowerment, inclusion, without talking of gender issues and Baba Sahib Ambedkar, it is very difficult to understand the Indian society. So that was a best ending. And the second point, which I personally that you brought on the question of access. The question of access is not only question of access to water, health, access to your freedom, access to your dignity, any development and any vision for development of a nation fails, completely collapses if there is no freedom for, dignity. And in that way, I think our young student and young researcher would be happy to take those references you brought in for Surinder Jotka or Satyajit Deshpande or Gopal Guru's And friends, you could feel that Professor Nagaraju was not talking about Baba Sahib Ambedkar, but he was much more focused as a researcher on bringing the references, bringing writings, bringing debates which is being there in the public domain. And that is what the purpose of Ambedkar Jayanti for a student like us should be, that we should reread and re-understand those writings. So I thank you profusely, Professor Nagaraju, for giving us such an excellent discussion on this. We may have at least a couple of questions or comments if somebody is having. We already have one in the form of questions. Muhammad Shaleen Khan, he is a PhD research student. He says that why ST's community is resistant against Hinduism, why they are not ready to accept it, what are their arguments? I mean, perhaps why the scheduled tribes as a community is not resisting against the Hinduism, what perhaps in the notion of caste structure. So it is a larger arguments I think he is trying to frame in the questions. And if you wish to reflect upon, please do.
Very good question, Mr. Salim. When you're talking about this debate, STs and the religious practices, as all of us know that there are broadly two debates on this question. One, scholars like G.S. Gurye, who primarily declared scheduled tribes as backward Hindus way back to 1930s. On the other hand, scholars like Virginius Kaka, one of the leading scholars in the field of Adivasi studies in India, who is a professor of sociology at the Delhi School of Economics, who primarily argued that Adivasis are not part of Hinduism. So he says that Adivasis are known for following their own faith. This faith is known as animism. As my friend Dr. Jayawuddin knows, animism is nothing but worshipping nature. Worshipping nature is very common practice among the people of scheduled tribes. That's one of the reasons why, if you refer to even recent declaration of the Jharkhand government has declared that scheduled tribes are not part of the Hinduism. Rather, they say that their tribes have their own religious faith, right? So this is the debate which need to be understood. So tribes have their own understanding of religion. So we can't equate, though one can see the commonality between the Hinduism and Adivasi practices. But their modes of worship and their gods and goddesses, their notion of spirituality is completely different. That's what scholars like Virginius Kaka primarily writes. I hope I'm clear, Dr. Jiyasab.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And in fact, the reference you gave of Jharkhand State Assembly, which passed this resolution,
that's right.
The state government has forwarded the request to President of the country that Sarna as a religion should be accepted of tribes.
Exactly.
In fact, in 2011, if we see more than 11 lakh people who named or who gave that we believe on Sarna, So you have large number of people who chose to give Sarna as their religion, and Jharkhand has done that initiative. So that's good, and perhaps that is the dichotomy of tribal communities where they fall.
Exactly.
If you do not have options in the census of India of your own choice, what they would do. So that's relevant point. Yeah. Tabriz, if Tabriz, if you want to ask, you can directly ask. It's a meeting format, so I thought it will be more meaningful if you ask. Please unmute, and you can only unmute and say. Or let me, if he has an issue, why Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar had strongly pitched for minority rights in the Constituent Assembly, as the Constituent Assembly discussed the interim report on fundamental rights on May 1, 1947. So he says that why he pitched so much on minority rights in the debates.
Very good question, Dr. Tabriz. As I told you, Ambedkar is a child of modernity. Right? As I said, as a person who studied in London School of Economics and Columbia University is exposed to the modern idea of citizen. When you're talking about the citizen, there are two types of citizenships. One is the traditional notion of citizen, which primarily works on the principles of unequal identities, where there was a concept of ruler and ruled, right, at the one level, and also there was a social citizenship on the basis of caste, on the basis of religion, on the basis of gender, right? Whoever was the rulers, and if the once they declare their religion as official religion of the state. So as all of us know, what used to happen in the pre-modern India, pre-modern world. But Ambedkar, being a student of modern nations, which were already experienced the democracy at the highest level, like America and Britain, he realized that he realized that one need to frame a India which is highly inclusive India, right? Where the people belong to diverse faiths, especially the minorities, based on the religion as well as the languages. They should feel as a equal citizens, not as unequal citizens. Sorry, that's one of the reason why one can see a number of references, a number of safeguards as a part of the fundamental rights, as a part of the directive principles of state policies, which primarily talks about why we need to respect the difference, right? Why we need to celebrate the diversity, celebrating diversity and respecting difference, right? Based on the faith, based on the language, based on the ethnicity, should be is a sign of the modernity. I think that's where the Ambedkar's, let's say, approach towards the notion of a nation, the notion of a nation which is very inclusive, which is modern, which is a collective, and which is plural in nature, is primarily comes. So, and also as all of us know that India was also as bear the burden of the partition, where the burden of partition is going to be much more on the minorities of India. So therefore, Ambedkar was much more careful to evolve or to recommend number of projects which are going to compensate, or which are going to create a new idea of a citizen on equal rights, on equal basis, both in the constitutional sense and also on moral sense. Because as a student of sociology, I can't resist myself when I'm talking about the citizens in a legal sense, citizen in a moral sense. Right? As my friend Dr. Jayawuddin, right, to talk about the notion of a dignity. When talking about the dignity, here it's not that automatically if you get a job you are going to be dignified, right? But the moment you are going to be treated as equal, it is the notion of equality in practice which gives you the happiness. As a human being, the moment you are going to be treated equally, it is going to be, we are going to be considered as a mature nation, as a democratic nation. So that's where Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's notion of nation, which primarily comes from inclusiveness, which inclusive faiths and practices. That's what I would like to say.
Good morning, sir.
Yes, please, Mr. Anirudh.
Yes, Naik. Yeah, Anirudh,
Good
go
morning,
ahead,
sir.
Anirudh.
Actually,
Yes, Anirudh.
thoughtful lectures, sir. Brilliant lectures. I have listened. So my question to you is, sir, as you know, there has been an attempt by the different communal forces to appropriate the ideology, original ideologies, and the thought, and rewrite the history of Ambedkar to suit their personal agenda. So what are the different challenges and what are the different methods can the civil society groups, and as well as the groups who are working on the ideas of Ambedkar to follow, so that we can afford the original ideas of Ambedkar in India as well as in Anglo?
Very good question, Anirudh. So this is where, friends, I wish to bring the writings of one of the famous scholar by name Meera Nanda, who talks about secularism without secularization of the nation, right? So here she makes a comparative study of India and America regarding secularism, So here also, when you're talking about Ambedkar, as I just now mentioned, that Ambedkar was primarily reduced to only one particular identity, right? So even today, the people, mostly the Dalits are owning Dr. B.R. Ambedkar by heart. But the other sections of the society, they are, though they started owning Ambedkar, but not in a full-fledged manner. So the one and only way to in order to create a democratic space, or in order to take forward the authentic ideology of Ambedkar to the larger masses, is that all the religious minorities and all the marginal sections of the society, such as the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, and backward classes, and the religious minorities and ethnic minorities, they have to own Ambedkar, and they should see what is the pedagogy of protest Dr. Ambedkar has offered, and what is the pedagogy of safety Dr. Ambedkar has envisaged in the Constitution. So by using Constitution as a safeguard, by using his ideas as a tools of social transformation, we need to propagate the authentic ideology of Ambedkar. Otherwise, as you rightly said, the people who try to own Ambedkar, who want to use Ambedkar as a symbolic icon, they are trying to, let's say, understand Ambedkar in their own way. So the best way is that let us democratize Ambedkar. So as a part of democratization of Ambedkar's image is in his imagination of New India, as his politics and his epistemology and his methods of political articulation and methods of political participation need to be taken to not only to the Dalit warders, to all the Adivasi warders, all the minorities warders, and all the backward class warders, or for the matter, the entire, let's say, public spaces of India should be, let's say, should own the Ambedkar. So, but unfortunately, as all of us know that, even today, the statues of Ambedkar were only in Dalit hamlets, mostly, if I am not wrong, mostly in Dalit hamlets, not in other public spaces, or not other, let's say, spaces belong to the different castes and different religions. So therefore, friends, the one and only way is that let us come out of the dominant sociological imagination of the image of Ambedkar, which was reduced to the identity, which was primarily reduced to only the Dalit identity. As I said, Ambedkar is beyond a Dalit identity. Ambedkar is a global scholar. Like whatever respect which is commanded by Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar deserves the similar kind of respect. Rather is a great respect. Because why I'm saying Ambedkar is so great compared to all other great champions of freedom and justice is because of two reasons. One, Ambedkar always used education as a tool of transformation. He was the one and only modern political leader who got two PhDs in abroad and who wrote almost 21 volumes, which is beyond the imagination of even any contemporary scholar, even the contemporary scholar. So therefore, friends, I wish to argue that Ambedkar is basically a philosopher and political leader and reformer, right? So it is the responsibility of the larger civil society, it is the responsibility of the intellectual class to educate the subaltern sections of the society, or to educate the other sections of the society. So that's where I wish to quote here the pedagogy of the oppressed of Paulo Freire. So far, Ambedkar's pedagogy is like a pedagogy of the oppressed. So, but what is the precondition? In order to, let's say, in order to bring freedom to the entire society, first it is the responsibility of the oppressed to liberate himself and herself, and to liberate the oppressor. To liberate himself and herself on the one hand, and to liberate the oppressor. So that means we need to take the ideology, to take the identity, to take the ideas of Ambedkar to the larger society. That is the one and only way to democratize Ambedkar across the globe, in general and India in particular. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I think we have reached to a point where the guest has spent an hour with us as promised, and we have just crossed 10 minutes as per the schedule. Definitely, they were very fruitful participation, importance, the kind of questions we raised, the kind of issues we raised, to our classroom, to ourselves, to our thinking process. And in total, the philosophy of Baba Sahib Ambedkar, every time we listen somebody is not complete to understand. It is always, in fact, the entire debate always and provides in a space that we feel that there should be another talk, there should be another discussion. And the emphasis which Professor Nagaraju gave, that education is one of the important tools. I take back this for myself, that reading, understanding, and working on education of the marginalized is the only important tool that can bring and transcend the generations from one to another. The notion of caste is very difficult. We all remember how Baba Sahib Ambedkar's, Bahujan Hitai, Bahujan Sukhai, this totality of his understanding of peoples, that everyone should have equal space, equal rights. But in modern India, modern world, without education, as the guest was saying, that without giving proper qualitative educations, all the transformations fails. Because this is the tool which makes us to realize our access, our rights, our equality, our dignity, our individuality, and also what Baba Sahib talks about, gender equality. Because any progress does not take, in his words, without, in fact, any society could be measured by the kind of progress our nation takes in women's participation in progress. So with these few important messages, I profusely thank to Professor G. Nagaraju, who is from University of Hyderabad, for spending 1 hour on the Forum of Democracy Dialogue and Indian Sociological Society's Research Committee on Minority Studies. I thank Democracy Dialogue friends also for having spent this time in organizing this. We had our colleagues, I don't know if Saeed wanted to say before Saeed is there, my colleague and good friend, if he wished to express, or yeah, Saeed.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, yeah, I had certain queries in my mind, but maybe I thought you are winding it up. Yeah. Actually, I just have two queries. One actually already Anirudh has actually raised, related to this communal polarization. So we see actually in recent times that it's so easy even for Dalits to fall prey to the trap of right-wing communal polarization. I think that we have been witnessing actually in Gujarat also, and later on that has been witnessed. So that's one thing. But now actually another query actually, which troubling me, that how to understand Dalit resurgence vis-a-vis the society at one level and the state at another level. So we have these two sets of social milieux where we actually need to locate this Dalit resurgence. So the question is this: that is there any leg that we need to make sense of? And I'm there. We have these examples of Bhima Koregaon case, that how the state actually dealt with this the recent spurt in the Dalit resurgence. And I think now we all know that the way actually the current political regime is behaving, the so-called this public sphere, what actually Habermas said, is totally destroyed. I mean, what to believe, what not to believe, and how to make sense of things is totally blurred. So there's certain kind of political, toxic narratives are dominating. So it's very difficult to make sense of the things. And actually, Professor Nagaraju also pointed about the education. And somebody mentioned that's the only tool that that can help us, in reshaping the environment. But I think, sir, you only wrote this paper. I mean, this. In Sociological Bulletin, it appeared very recently. How even Dalits are actually moving to private education, and that actually is, of course, they are moving, but in what proportion and at what level actually they are moving to. So there is a sort of accentuation of this inequalities, this reproduction of those things. So I mean, how then the whole issue of inequalities and kind of exploitation, and that has been going on at the institutional level. Thank you, sir.
Very good observations, Dr. Saeed. I totally agree with you. Your important observations with reference to the political polarization based on the social polarization. As I told you that somewhere along the line, we're talking about the Ambedkar vision of the constitutional inclusion. It is primarily limited to one segment of the Indian society. That is a fact, as all of us know, that the Ambedkar is primarily owned by only mostly the Dalits all over the country. That is the first point, to a large extent. So, but as I said, the political polarization was primarily an outcome of, according to my understanding, is an outcome of the economic, let's say, inequalities, which were primarily witnessed in the post 1990s, and also the shrinking shrinking employment opportunities in the government sector. So that's where we as a nation, as really articulated by scholars like Mirananda, has primarily failed to transform the Indian notion of secularism to the people's level or to the intellectual level. So the notion of Indian secularism was primarily limited to the intellectual class as an idea, right? As an idea, people have really talked about Indian secularism, but as a practice, how far we were successful as a practice. So, but my understanding is that this notion of secularism, based on, as T.N. Madan rightly uses the concept, the idea of tolerance, despite of a number of rulers, either in ancient India, medieval India, and modern India, there was a notion of a tolerance, social tolerance, on the basis of their faith and practices, right? So that's one of the reasons why India as a nation continued for thousands of years, despite of diversity. But what is unfortunately what is happening is that the kind of politics which are primarily unfolded in the post, let's say, independent in India in general and post 1990s in particular, has primarily led towards this more social polarization on the basis of the religious identities, especially in the context of North India. Now that is spreading all over India, right? Either West Bengal or South India, it refers to Telangana or Andhra Pradesh. So my understanding is that the one and only solution or the possible solution, according to my knowledge, is that we need to secularize the society. Yes, by taking clue from Mirananda, I want to use, let's say, once again highlight the point. Secularization of the society is one of the important solution to understand what is the meaning of secularism. Because as all of us know that though we talk about secularism, but generally whenever there is any government function, generally we see all the rituals in a one particular religious format, right? So even at the time of rocket launching also, generally this is what happens, either in India as well as including in America also, they read Bible before starting some important program. So this is a problem with even the modern notion of a nation, which primarily emerged from the European notion of a nation. And it talks about one nation, one language, one religion, one culture, right? So if you refer to the writings of Eugene Weber, which is a French scholar, who talks about the idea called from Frenchman to from farmer to a Frenchman, from a farmer to from peasant to a Frenchman. That means it says that peasant represents the pre-modern and the Frenchman represents the modern citizen. So here also in the case of India, unfortunately, what is happening is that we are still in a peasant stage. Peasant stage, we have not yet become a Frenchman, are not in a true sense Indian, in a true, let's say, secular notion of Indian. So that's where, as I said, one way of dealing with this question is that taking Ambedkar's what are the Ambedkar's notion of constitution, right? So as I said, because the people who are owning Ambedkar, they themselves are marginal groups, and only from 1970s onwards, one class of people they started, let's say, entering into employment sector as a part of the fourth class employees, second, to the only recently, as you know, only from 2000 onwards, one can see the rise of Dalit intellectuals in the universities at the professor level, right? Otherwise, in most of the universities, as Thorat sir in his paper, some prepared as a part of Indian Institute of Dalit Studies, which says that reservation did not implemented for almost 50 years. Only in the post 1990s, there was an attempt to implement reservations at the higher educational levels. So even the intellectual class among Dalits emerged only in the last 15 years in a larger level. So therefore, it is the responsibility of the Dalit intellectual class to take forward the writings of Ambedkar, and also it is the moral responsibility of the minorities and Adivasis and all the Bojan scholars and all the progressive scholars, irrespective of caste and religion. I used to use only one word, that is, all the progressive scholars have to understand what is the vision of Ambedkar and how to take it forward. I think that kind of, let's say, taking Ambedkar vision to the public sphere. Once again, I wish to take your idea of Habermas. The moment you take Ambedkar's vision to the public spaces in a true sense, I think we are going to see a new India. That is the only way to deschool the present system and reschooling the idea of India in a proper constitutional sense.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. Such a wonderful exposition on the issue. I mean, it's contagious. All sort of, always as you are. I often get a chance to talk to you also. So wonderful. A deeper level you touch the issues. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much, Sai. Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
this.
So I now take permission from all the participants here to end this program with thank to the guest and everyone here. We have people like Padmavati, she is from Karinagar, she has been here, a very active sociology teacher. We have Aisha also. I mean, I'm naming because we have very few whom I can see, and Aisha from Bangalore. So we have our students, Roshni, Noor, Akhil, Tabrez, Farha, Bushra, all the Nazrain is there, and I now I got few messages about the question. So, but then it's already we have discussed a lot. Perhaps I'll share if relevant those questions to you through email, and they can connect with the Professor G. Nagaraju. Thank you so much for joining us on this forum, and I hope that this discussion continues, these deliberations takes place not only on online and through special talks, but also within the students, among the students, and in our informal discussions. I once again wish everyone here and everyone who is watching on Facebook a very happy Ambedkar Jayanti. Thank you, everyone. Jai Bhim.
Thank you, Dr. Jayawuddin. Jai Bhim to all. Thank you so much for this great opportunity. And thank you so much for all the critical questions.